There's a meme going around in China right now where young people, like Gen Zs, are pretending to be birds.
今天这一只鸟，布布鸟，布布布布，布布布布。
忍不住化身一只固执的鸟，逆着狂风一直飞到底。
When I first saw this, I thought it was funny and rather creative. I mean, these aren't photoshopped. Right? These people are tucking their legs inside their shirts and putting their hands out from the front so they look like bird's feet, and their empty shirt sleeves look like bird wings, and the whole thing is quite comical. The question is, why are they doing this? And the answer can be found in what they're saying in these clips. I can help with the translations here. For instance, this guy here, right before he turned into a bird, says, "Oh no, I don't want to go to work. I want freedom. I want to become a free bird." And then he became one. And this female bird here has a subtitle in front, which basically says, "I will stop going to work and become a bird instead." So these people are basically tired and stressed out by their work and want to become birds because birds seem free and devoid of psychological distress. Now this meme has made its way outside the great Chinese firewall to some extent, leading to some report in the West, but most of the Western coverage of this meme tends to focus on the economic and political impact of the story. And indeed, this meme does point to certain economic and political problems that are hard to miss. For instance, China is suffering from high unemployment. The economy is not doing very well. There aren't many jobs. Yet, Chinese universities continue to pump out a shit ton of fresh graduates every year. Most of them will struggle to find jobs. And for the ones who did find jobs, they will suffer from a rather toxic work culture, what's known as 996, right? 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And the claim is that this bad economic situation is caused by the Chinese government's mismanagement, and this has caused the Chinese youth to suffer so much that they'd rather become birds now than continue to work or find jobs. Now, these problems aren't just in China, of course. There's no shortage of economic and political problems around the world. For instance, after COVID, high inflations are destroying people's savings, the slow economy causes large-scale layoffs, the job markets don't look good in most economies, and the politicians running those countries always seem idiotic or incompetent, if not sometimes downright evil. And a lot of people have been talking and complaining about these issues for a long time. So the economic and political take on this meme is true, but not new. I mean, I'll tell you that the economy is bad and politicians are idiots, and you'll agree with me, and that's the end of that story. So I'll stop beating on that broken drum now and talk about something much more interesting instead, and dissect this meme from a psychological and spiritual perspective. Now the question is, why do Chinese youths want to become birds? The answers seem obvious. I mean, people are stressed out and birds aren't, so people want to stop being stressed out by becoming birds. But that seems like an odd solution, isn't it? After all, don't humans tend to think of themselves as a kind of superior animals, or some kind of higher life form? Why then would humans, when under distress, want to downgrade themselves to something that they would consider the lower life form? And why don't animals seem to be stressed out the way that we do in the first place? It certainly looks like they should be. Compared to humans, animals tend to live much more precarious lives. They're making direct contact with nature, where almost everything is trying to kill them all the time. They need to worry about predators and their next meal. Death is always just around the corner for them. We humans live in a much safer and more comfortable and predictable environment than animals, yet we are always much more stressed out than animals. Why is that? One way to answer this question is from a psychological and spiritual perspective. Humans have the ability to think, but we don't have the ability to stop thinking, not by default. Anyways, Most people cannot stop thinking for just 1 minute, even if their lives and the fate of the world depends on it. Which is odd because I'd imagine that I can keep my hand in fire for a minute if the fate of the world depends on it, yet I can't stop myself from thinking for 1 minute. This is a peculiar circumstance, and it is the cause of much of our psychological suffering. Animals, on the other hand, don't have the ability to think the way humans do, so they don't have the level of psychological suffering that humans have. Not because animals are more enlightened and have transcended suffering, but rather they simply don't have the ability to. Their brains don't have enough processing power to generate enough concepts to stress them out. So they can't suffer conceptually even if they want to. Here's an example. Sometimes when I look at my apartment, seeing how it's small and old and not up to par with the luxury apartments that influencers show off on Instagram, I might start to feel quite distressed about my financial situation. I could start complaining internally about how broke I am and only have enough money to live in a shitty apartment, and by extension have to work a job I don't like and hardly have enough time to work on projects I care about. Now these kinds of thoughts would start to make me sad and stressed out, and if I'm lucky to catch myself going down that train of thoughts, I can think my way out of it through a cognitive reframe. For example, I can start observing that I'm in fact incredibly lucky. I'm not living in a war zone right now, for instance. Of all the things I worry about, the ceilings collapsing down on me is not one of them. I live in a prosperous first world country in a nice part of town. I'm not starving in North Korea. If I want to eat, I just need to walk 6 feet into the kitchen and open my fridge. People starving in war zones would consider their deepest wish realized just to trade places with me. And myself would consider my own wish realized a couple years ago just to switch places with me now. Back when I just graduated from university, I wanted this apartment that I'm living in because of its location and the cheap rent, and I wanted the job that I have now. And I had to work very hard to get those things, and now that I have them, I take them for granted and all I do is complaining about them. So when I perform a cognitive reframe like this, I would suddenly start to feel happy and grateful. And this cognitive reframe, by the way, is a technique from Stoic philosophy that I talk more about in this video. And that's all good, but what's odd is that the entire process is happening in my head, while nothing material has changed about me or around me, right? I'm still the same guy standing here, having the same amount of money in my bank account, right? Living in the same apartment, and yet my physiological and emotional state have just gone through this rather dramatic journey of being sad and distressed and then happy and grateful as a result of stories I'm telling myself in my head. These psychological changes don't map onto anything that's happening in the real world because nothing has happened in the real world. Now, if I have a dog who lives in the same apartment as me, the dog's state of being won't be affected at all during this. It will simply be stoked to be in its owner's presence this entire time. And insofar as my dog is able to sense my emotional state, it would be rather confused about what just happened. From the dog's perspective, its owner just suddenly became sad and suddenly became happy for no apparent reason. The dog wouldn't be able to map that onto any problem that they can find because the problems are conceptual in my head. It's not out there in the real world. But it's not like animals are never stressed, but their negative emotions tend to be very appropriate to the situations in the real world. For instance, if an intruder breaks into my house, my dog would be very stressed. You'll probably be able to see adrenaline acting up in the dog's body in real time as the dog gets ready to fuck shit up. But once the intruder is taken care of, the dog will just go right back to being stoked to be alive again. While I can continue to ruminate about what just happened, I'm feeling offended that someone breaks into my place, and getting stressed over the damaged property, having to pay for the repair and the replacement, etc. My dog would not be worried about any of that because the dog doesn't conceptualize problems. It can only see situations that are right in front of him. And if those situations aren't problematic, the dog wouldn't be stressed. This default state that animals have to always be in the present is why humans can sometimes feel envious of animals and want to trade places with them. When Gen Zs in China, who are stressed out by abstract problems like the economy or the job market or the future, the bird that they see flying around without a care in the world suddenly seem to be a much more desirable state of being. Which is why when these young people start to pretend to be birds as a joke, that joke immediately resonated with so many people that it became a meme. Now, it's important to know that there's a trade-off here, as it is not always better to be animals. Being an animal does have its advantages. For one, there isn't unnecessary psychological suffering, but you miss out on the depth and richness of human experience that come from having a complex mind that thinks and conceptualizes, such as the ability to create art and music and infrastructure and cultures and to appreciate them. In other words, the kind of experiences that humans can have could possibly have more variety and be more complex and in a way richer than those of animals like birds and dogs. And I like having these human experiences, which is why I don't want to trade places with animals. So the mind really is a double-edged sword. It grants human richer experiences, but also the necessity to suffer. Now, human suffering is only necessary until it's not. I believe suffering serves a spiritual purpose in a way. It motivates us to look deeper, and it gives us the urgency to develop spiritually. There's an interesting structure here that looks somewhat like a cycle. It starts with the animals who don't have a complex mind that can conceptualize, therefore they cannot suffer from concepts. Then we have humans who have a complex thinking mind but can't stop thinking, therefore we suffer. But then we can develop ourselves spiritually to rise above the thinking mind, such that we can still use our mind if we want to, but we are now at the cause, not the effect of our minds. We can stop thinking when we don't need to, and the mind stops being an obstacle between us and the reality in this moment. And as a result, we return to a state of peace like those of animals, but with an added layer of appreciation. We can appreciate peace more because unlike animals who live in the present moment permanently, we know what it's like to lose the present moment and suffer. We appreciate it more because we know what it's like to lose it. So I think the Chinese Gen Z's instinctual desire to become birds reflects an underlying desire for peace, to stop thinking incessantly, to stop suffering unnecessarily, and to return to the present moment. In other words, it's a desire for spiritual growth. The question then is how to stop thinking and be present. And that is a much bigger question than one YouTube video can answer, but I will point you to some resources that have helped me tremendously in this area. First is a book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and the second is an app called Waking Up by Sam Harris. They both provide a great conceptual framework about spirituality, while also gives you practical guidance on how to develop spiritually. I'll link both of them in the description. I'm not sponsored, by the way. And if you find this content interesting and want to see more of what I'm working on, check out my Patreon in the description as well.